Hey everyone, welcome to the first event in the Process Connect community. Today we're going to be talking about managing lead statuses for businesses. Very important topic in terms of just making sure that we're reaching out to the right people and we understand what stages that they're in. So before we jump too far into it, though, I do want to wait a few minutes here to just let people get in and see if anyone else wants to join and things like that. So we'll give it about a minute or so. If you have any questions, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring that throughout the conversation. We got about 60 minutes or so today that we'll be going through some of this, and a part of that will be to answer some questions towards the end. So get ready. If you guys have used lead statuses before or are familiar with them, love to have you drop in the chat like how you use them. What are some of your favorite lead statuses and why? That can be very, very useful for some of the other people in the audience that may be hearing about this for the first time, or maybe they've tried using them but it hasn't worked very well. So definitely drop that stuff into the chat so we can make sure to share with everyone. All right, guys. So I think we've waited enough time in terms of letting folks in. Hey, Elijah. See you said hello in the chat there. So see Samantha. Hi. I know I'm not in here alone, so that's great. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So what I'll start off by saying is that lead statuses are a part of a process. As you guys know, the Process Connect community is all about processes and technology and platforms and how we can optimize and just operate better, right? In the things that we do every day. And if you're on a sales team or a sales manager or sales executive, you are probably very familiar with lead statuses in terms of seeing the name, but maybe you don't like to utilize them for a number of reasons. One may be that you don't want to keep track of a lead status, right? That's something you have to manage. That's something that you have to remember to do is update that lead status. One of the nice things about lead statuses, though, is that they can be automated, which is great to an extent. And so one of the biggest things I will say is that they help hold us accountable and they help us understand where people are in our buyer's journey. So lead statuses can be great for that. So let's jump over to our next slide and talk about this for a second. So lead statuses are an important part of your funnel in terms of like when you have a new lead comes in, for example, right? So let's say you have a new lead, they've opted in, if they showed interest in something and you want a sales rep or you as a sales rep need to reach out. Having a lead status of new is a good way to know who you have not attempted to contact before, or at least in this opportunity. And that's important. And one of the things that my slide doesn't really bring up, but I'll say is a lot of times what I find when we're working with our clients is that lead status and life cycle statuses can get very mixed up, right? So they're very different and they both serve their own purpose while sometimes feeling like they kind of can overlap. The biggest difference is that a lead status is designed to understand the process that a prospect is going through. So, for example, I get a new lead. Now I want to attempt contact with that lead. So that lead will be a new, letting me know that I need to try to attempt contact with them. So in terms of what this may look like is, let's imagine you have a new person submit something on your website or a form, and they get a lead status of new. As a rep, I know now to reach out to that particular contact. And once I attempt contact, I will want to move it to a status called attempting. What this lets me know is I can now differentiate the new leads that I've never tried to contact versus the leads that I have at least attempted contact. Then we would go through different stages. So one of the cool things about lead status is that they can be tailored to your business, right? So here we'll go into and talk about, like, you have lead status, you have contacted leads, and then you have like qualified leads. So this is showing like three different types, right? So we talked about new already, right? So this is somebody that's just entering that sales pipeline. They're just now becoming a possibility of being an opportunity for you. And then you have a contacted lead status. So you may have heard me say attempting. We at Processology, we will use engaged. And what this is showing us is who's due, who have we attempted to contact, and who's currently engaging with us, right? So you also see qualified. So qualified may mean that this person has been qualified for your event, meaning they meet your minimum requirements to become potential an opportunity, things like that. So lead statuses are helping you guide them down that sales cycle or that buyer's journey so that you can understand where each person is. So when I jump into a conversation with a prospect, I can look at their lead status and know what stage they're in and how the conversation needs to start, right? So if I see someone that's already been qualified, then I can start off at whatever my qualification process looks like, or pre or post qualification process looks like. I can start them off there versus talking to them about something maybe I already covered in the new or the engaged stage. So the other thing that's important when we look at the different types of leads or lead statuses is that we want to also think through things like uh, what do we want to call them internally, right? So, for example, I may call them new. Some people may call them like just arrived. I may say attempting, where somebody else may says like attempting contact. I may say engaged when somebody else may say contacted, right? So it's these lead statuses really what works for you. But the key here is to get something that is standardized and something that you are consistently using. The benefits that come along with this, which we'll talk about a little bit later in our slides, um, is you get a lot of when we think about benefits, we think about things like how do we prioritize our leads? How can we report on these leads to understand where are prospects in the buyer's journey? And these lead statuses help us do that, right? I can see if I have 100 people that come through the buyer's journey, I can see how many of them have never been contacted because they're in the new status. I can see how many of my reps are currently attempting to contact, or those reps can also see how many they need to, or how many they're currently attempting, and how many they need to attempt to contact, right? I could also see how many of those have engaged of that 100, how many of those have actually engaged with us, and then how many are qualified. So it's a lot of insights that can come from that, no matter if you're an actual sales rep or if you're a manager, a director, or executive level where you are trying to understand your buyer's journey. Lead statuses can be a great way to do that. So, how to create an effective lead scoring system. So, I have this in here in terms of talking about lead scoring, primarily for a reason because your lead status says once you get to a part of understanding like who should you be reaching out to, right? So, who should become that new lead, and who should you invest time and resources in, right? You may have a database of 1,000, 2,000, 25,000, right? In some cases, even hundreds and millions. So when you get up into those numbers, it can become very difficult to know who to reach out to. And so this is where lead scoring can really help saying, hey, if somebody scores here, right? Maybe you're doing scoring based on like activity and you're doing scoring based on maybe certain characteristics about the person or their business. This will allow you to say this person fits our ICP, right? Our ideal client persona, and now we want to have a rep actually reach out to them. So at that point, you can have lead scoring actually set the new status of your lead status, right? So now, based on the lead score, your reps know take action, right? So that lead scoring can become a trigger on when you should start to invest time and resources into a specific contact or company. So that can be very important in terms of that. Now, I won't go too deep into exactly how to lead score. That'll be a topic for another time because that can get pretty in depth in itself, and there's a lot of ways you can go about that as well. So implementing and tracking lead statuses. So the crucial thing to understand about lead statuses is that it is an extra property. It is an extra field that someone has to fill out or that you have to automate to automatically adjust based on user activity and engagement. And so it can be difficult to implement for, let's say, a rep or a company that's not used to it. However, the gains outweigh the pain that you'll have when going through that enablement process. Um, what we want to think about is what do we get if we implement this, and how is that going to help us? And then once we understand the value of implementing something like lead statuses and implementing it effectively, Then we can go into understanding exactly what is our strategy to roll this out, what is going to be our strategy to hold people accountable, and what is going to be our strategy to actually train our users on how to do this. I'm a huge believer when it comes to sales is how do you make this as simple as possible for the rep, right? I don't think it's a secret that most reps don't like to keep up on the data. And so I'm not going to call you guys out too much on that, but I don't think it's a big secret, right? So things like notes, keeping track of like things like lead statuses and keeping track of and tracking calls and what's happening in those calls. All these things are very important, but can be difficult when it comes to the enablement piece. So it is very important that you document what your lead statuses are, that you define each stage of your lead status so that people know when somebody's a new, what does that actually mean? When somebody's an engaged, what does that actually mean? I recommend doing this on if you have a documentation software to do it there. If you don't, I recommend using a Google Doc, right? It can be as simple as that. And making this readily available to your reps. That is the most important part, is that they can access it and they can get to it quickly and easily. If you guys are using a system that allows you to have things like playbooks or something like that, that is a great place to have a playbook, maybe for sales resources or something that your reps can easily get. I'm a big fan of how do you bring resources to the user instead of the user having to go to the resources. And that's not always possible, but if you can, that would be my recommendation. So in terms of defining the lead statuses clearly, it is everyone needs to be on the same page about this, right? You can't have one person saying engage or one person saying contact, right? Contacted. You can't have one person saying new and one person saying untouched, for example. You want to make sure that you're on the same page and you're using the same terminology. That way, no matter if two reps are talking to each other, they know what they're talking about and they can communicate jointly. You also want to make sure that people that are looking at reporting, right, your executive and your management that's looking at reporting also understand these terms and have a way to reference these terms so that when they see a graph that just says 50 people in new and 60 people in attempting and 20 people in engaging, they actually know what that means. So in terms of like best practices of managing lead statuses, I think I've mentioned quite a bit um, on best practices in terms of like documentation is key, training is going to be key, and then understanding the reason why you want this information, that is also going to be key, right? What does it tell you? What questions does it answer? It's also very important to have those conversations internally so that you can make sure that you are not training on something that is not needed, right? So there may be some industries where lead status does not work for them or is as important to them. Whereas some industries, this is like key. They have to have this information. They have to understand it. What I will say in terms of best practices is just keep it simple, right? Keep it as simple as possible. Typically, you want to think about statuses for new, statuses for attempting. When you start engaging, right, the person's actually responding. You want to move to engage. You want to think about things like maybe qualified. So your rep has qualified that this person has a problem that you can help solve. Once the person becomes an opportunity, so maybe when that deal is opened, and now you have an opportunity, you want to move the lead status to opportunity. Now, they're also, I don't know if there's a formal name for this, but I'm just going to call it like um, negative and hygiene type lead statuses that you can also utilize. So this may be something for things like delete, right? So maybe you have somebody fill out a web form and it's just all bad information. Somehow it gets through all of your other filters that you have and reaches a sales rep. How can they mark that person or that contact for delete? So there's a nice a way that you can use lead statuses that a sales rep can use the property they're already used to using to say this person should be deleted or recommended for deletion. Unqualified can be one. Also, one of my favorites is nurture. So if someone is just they're just not ready, right? They have a problem, but they're just not ready to move forward. Well, we don't want to delete them, and we don't want to make them unqualified because technically they are qualified. So instead, let's mark them as nurture so that our marketing team knows, hey, this is someone that may be a good fit for us in the future. But they need to bake a little bit. They need to go back in the oven. They need to bake some more, right? We got to work on them a little bit more. So nurture is always a really good one, I think, to add as well. In terms of maximizing conversion rates through lead status. So the nice thing about lead statuses is that they do give you data points, right? So we can understand how many people are actually going from one status to another status. And this gives us an idea if we start to see in our reporting that we're getting a bottleneck, let's say, of, hey, we're getting a lot of new and we're getting a lot of attempting, but very few are engaging. Then what this allows me to understand is that maybe the messaging we're using is not effective, right? So maybe the way we're reaching out to the person is not the most effective way to communicate. Therefore, they're never engaging, right? Maybe my message is just not getting to their inbox at all, and my calls are not getting through their voicemail. There could be a lot of reasons why somebody may be sitting in the attempting stage and never move to the engagement stage. But by tracking the activity types, it does allow me to see where conversions are happening and conversions are not, and letting me know where I need to invest my time to maximize conversions. All right, guys. So that's basically it on my slides in terms of talking through this and what these are, and giving us an opportunity to hopefully bring some value to what lead statuses are and why you should be using them, and how they can be used at every level. Whether it's a rep using lead statuses to track and understand their work, or it's an executive trying to get a more bird's eye view of what's happening with their sales team, or whether it is more of a analytics person that is trying to understand, hey, what is happening across the buyer's journey in general. Lead statuses are going to be a great way to help you do that. So I'll stop sharing here. Do we have any questions or anything inside of the chat or anything? Or does anyone have any questions in regard to lead statuses in general? So in terms of what I will say is, while we're waiting to see if any questions come through, what I will leave and say is that in terms of lead size, I think some of the benefits that I've seen in terms of optimization, right? That was the last thing we talked about. Is like, how can we maximize and increase and create better performance? I think it's important to also consider people going through different lead statuses is what is their personas, like how do they fit, right? Are they an ideal fit? Are they not? That's important to also understand as another layer to your lead statuses, in terms of, you may have people that are not converting. The question you want to ask yourself: one, are we even talking to the right audience? And two, if we are, then great, are we saying the right things? And if we are saying the right things, then are we using the right channels, right? So these are things that you want to consider when you're trying to figure out how to maximize conversions. It looks like Samantha is saying, looking forward to more on lead scoring. Yeah, lead scoring is always a fun one, and can get complex depending on your industry, depending on what it is that you value, right? So it's one of those things where for some people it can be very much like demographic based, or it could be based on location. It could be more important to you, or it could be based on traits, right? Personality traits and things like that. So lead scoring can get very interesting, but also fun, right? Because it does help you really say, hey, we have 100 people coming in. Let's talk to only the 50, or let's engage only with the 50 that seems like they would be interested in our service, or the 50 that we think that we can actually help. So lead scoring is pretty powerful in that way. So I have a little bit of gardening blowing going on, so hopefully you guys are not hearing that in the background. Any other questions? Let's see. Samantha says, "Can you make it simple on different on example on the difference again on lead status versus lead stage?" So I think Samantha's talking about lead status versus life cycle stage, which I think is the difference that she's asking about. So in terms of lead status and life cycle stage, the big difference is the life cycle stage is typically going to be like how you're attracting someone to your business, how you are nurturing them and like moving them from, let's say, an acquisition stage to a conversion stage, and then ultimately to a decision stage. So this might be things like a person is a subscriber or a lead or a marketing qualified lead or a sales qualified lead, opportunity or customer. Those are all going to be life cycle statuses, and customers are typically only going to go through a life cycle one time. However, they may become an opportunity multiple times. So lead statuses allows us to track opportunity cycles versus life cycles. So in terms of understanding a customer who's a life cycle, which once they become a customer, they may always remain a customer, depending on your industry and how your processes are. In most cases, though, once someone's life cycle becomes customer, they stay there. Well, what happens if I have an opportunity to sell that customer again or upsell that customer? Then what happens? How do I track that? How do I know where the person is in that buyer journey? Well, this is where lead statuses comes in. So lead status is going to help me track the opportunity with that customer. So now I can say this customer is a lead status of new, and I'm attempting to contact them. I've engaged with them. I've qualified that we can help them solve their challenge and that they're a good fit for, let's say, another project with us. And now I have an open deal with the customer. So now their lead status is opportunity again, right? So again, a customer can go through a life cycle typically once, but they can go through lead status, or you can call it lead cycle or lead status, multiple times, right? So they can go through the buying process more than one time. Samantha, I hope that answers your question there and that cleared up some of that confusion. Well, guys, if I don't have any more questions, I think we'll cut it there. So this is a little bit shorter, but the goal here is that you guys are gaining valuable information in a short amount of time. We want with these courses and these events and workshops that we put on in the Process Connect community, we want to make sure that you're able to learn actionable things that you can go and apply in your business today. So if you're not already a member of the Process Connect community, I recommend signing up for our either free starter plan or for individual or professional plans where you can get access to more things like private events, Q&A sessions, courses, things like that. So either way, sign up for the free version. We would love to have you a part of the Process Connect community. Thanks.